And closer to home, the next election is also bound to be about the economy. We're only 15 months away from it. And joining us this morning, instantly, thank you very much. Oh, well done. On the phone is the ACT Party leader, because they have announced what they're going to do to solve the cost of living crisis for New Zealand. Now, they've done it 15 months out, which I think is not only very brave, because you do tend to get criticised, for you've got 15 months of criticism coming your way. But at least you've got 15 months of these ideas also to percolate through the public consciousness to get there, and you set the agenda. So there's a sort of a risk, yes, but on the other hand, if you're first out, you've already got to the promised land, you hope. Joining us this morning to talk about the ACT Party's bid to save the economy, and more importantly, do something about the cost of living, which will still bound to be with us in 12 to 15 months, is their leader, ACT Party leader David Seymour. David, thank you for joining us this morning.
No worries. Thank you very much for having us on the show again.
Okay, Dave, what's the story? How are you going to stop New Zealand from this enormous problem that doesn't seem to go away and is besieging the Western world?
Well, the most important thing is to identify the root of the problem, and it's fundamentally there's too much money printed, borrowed, and deficits spent by the government chasing too few goods, because we put so many restrictions on the way that we bring goods into the country, bring workers into the country, actually produce things within the country. There's too much cash sloshing around because the government spends and prints it, and not enough goods to buy. So I know that sounds general, but you got to get to the heart of it. Reducing the fuel excise tax temporarily, or giving people a payout for 3 months, that doesn't solve the heart of the problem. So, on too much money, the Reserve Bank governor needs to be held accountable. The Australians are doing an investigation into their central bank for the way that they handled interest rates, whereas Adrian Orr, in my view, has screwed up beyond all belief and created this inflation crisis. And yet all he's obliged to do is maintain stable prices in the, quote, medium term. So he basically gets off scot-free. Similarly, we're a country now that has 70 different local authorities, each one approving the kind of plasterboard you can use. And unsurprisingly, we've discovered that only one producer got 96% of the market through that labyrinth. This is the kind of problems that we put on ourselves, and if we don't start reducing them, then of course costs will just keep increasing. Now, let me give you another couple of examples. We currently levy $200 million of tariffs on chocolate biscuits, kids' school uniforms. Chardonnay attracts tariffs. No other country in the world is going to give us a free trade agreement because we dropped tariffs on Chardonnay. Nevertheless, we keep putting those costs onto people. So, it's about sorting out monetary policy. It's about sorting out regulations. It's about making sure that we get goods and services into the country. And if you do all of those things, then you start to shift the ratio between money and goods, and therefore reduce prices.
Okay, so the three primary things there. I just want to do tariffs because, gosh, we haven't talked about tariffs for a long, long time in the history of New Zealand, probably. I'm amazed that there are tariffs on Chardonnay, school uniforms and chocolate biscuits. What's the rationale there? Because usually tariffs are used to protect your own industry.
Well, I think people just forgot about them. It's not a huge amount, but, $200 million, well, that's about $40 per person per year extra payment that you make. And we should just get rid of it. It's not serving any purpose. Right now, people can do with every dollar. Why keep a policy that doesn't make sense? I think it's a legacy of a bygone era that people have forgotten about. It's that simple.
Yeah, I'm sure they've forgotten about it. I certainly have. The plasterboard scandal and the jib board is a classic, where you're absolutely right.
I refuse to say jib.
Right, because it's a trade name. And no, I understand what you're saying. But it's created by New Zealand legislation, you say. You're just saying, listen, if it meets the standards, bring it in. Simple as that. Or are the standards the problem?
Yep, look. Well, we've got 5,300 people working at MB. What they should do is create a materials equivalence register and say, if this material is equivalent to whatever you've currently been approving, then councils must approve an equivalent material. It's that simple.
Yeah. It makes sense too. It wouldn't just be Jibboard, it would be a series of other things in our economy as well. The big issue there, though, yesterday, when you announced this policy, was around, it seemed to me, migration. We've had massive migration in the early 90s. You obviously saw that as a good thing and you want to repeat it?
Well, put it this way, I think the immigration debate has completely changed. Even 5 years ago, we had fought the 2017 election on maybe immigration needs to be reduced. Migrants are pushing down wages, they're straining infrastructure, too much migration. Okay, that was then. Today, the world is totally flipped. Every country is laying out the red carpet in a war for talent because they know that if they don't attract people, they can't produce, they can't look after ageing populations, and all of a sudden, the whole immigration debate has turned. So you look at the UK, they've just extended their working holiday visa. So is Spain, for New Zealanders, that is. The Australians are saying they're going to stop treating us like second-class citizens over there, perhaps. Believe it when I see it. But the point is that just about every country is laying out the red carpet to try and attract people. Here in New Zealand, if we continue to treat people like second-class citizens, make them jump through hoops, wait for long periods of time for no good reason, the outcome is we're just going to find that those nurses we need, those workers that we need in horticulture, all of those workers are going to bypass.
Can I give you an example of that?
Is businesses don't produce.
Well, can I give you an example of that? Overnight, I'm not sure if you're aware, but the Queensland government has just given a cost of living bonus to school teachers, which will mean, on top of an 11 to 20% pay increase. So your average Queensland school teacher, this is not your principal, this is not your deputy principal, your average school teacher will take home $130,000 this year as a consequence of that. Now, at that point, if I was getting $130,000 to be a school teacher in Queensland, I know where I'm going. Isn't that right?
Yep, and look, that's the war for talent writ large. It's a perfect example, and it'll have an effect on the number of teachers in New Zealand classrooms, I can guarantee you. So look, we've said, look, at the moment, every accredited employer has to do a labour market test to show that they're short of workers before they can bring in an immigrant worker. Well, the ACT Party says we need to apply some common sense. We know there's a labour crisis. We don't need every employer to individually prove that there's a shortage of labour in New Zealand. We should just say if you're an accredited employer, if you've got someone you want to employ, and if they're not a criminal, bring them in. These are the kinds of practical steps we need to take. And if I could just give you one more, we need another supermarket chain in New Zealand. We need a foreign competitor that's sophisticated, innovative, shake it up. But the problem is, we've got the Overseas Investment Office. If any of them did want to come here, they'd be waiting at the border, making them prove that they're not some sort of nefarious, cancer coming to New Zealand. They've got to justify their existence before they're even allowed to think about investing here. If we keep treating people that way, we will become a backwater.
David, you've put out, it's not a full economic policy and it's not a full budget, obviously, ahead of the election, but do you expect to get attacked on this, or is your aim also to push national into addressing these issues before the election as well?
Well, a bit of both. We called the cost of living crisis first. We put out our first cost of living document, which we called Hard Labour, back in December. The Nats got on board with that. Then we did our alternative budget. And now we've got this latest document, 9 ideas to reduce the cost of living in New Zealand. I think one of ACT's roles is to ensure that the next government is not Labour-light, to make sure that we actually have a government that is completely committed to improving the policy, not just the people, because the problem with the Nats is that they're very happy to keep Labour policies so long as it's them doing it. And the ACT Party says that's not enough.
Well, I think there'd be a number of people who listen to this particular show who would agree with you on that. And finally, I guess, when does Parliament recommence on this at the moment? Is it next week?
Oh, look, your property's safe until Tuesday. Yep.
Next Tuesday
at 2 o'clock, anything could happen.
Yeah.
Yep.
Well, the reason I ask that question is because I'm expecting that this will be a very... Three Waters, obviously, is an issue that's dominated. The bill, Water Services Entities Bill, I think, is due to finish submissions, or public submissions anyhow, on this. What do you expect this parliamentary term to be the primary issue that you're debating, discussing, fomenting, if you like?
Well, look, the primary issue for New Zealand over the next couple of years is what our national identity is. So long as we are desperately trying to divide ourselves into tangata whenua, land people, and tangata tiriti, treaty people, two types of New Zealander, we're not going to be able to solve any of our other problems. So that's the underlying issue. It underlies three waters. It'll underlie this new media entity. It will underlie healthcare. And I think that will just keep on coming up. We ain't going to solve our economic problems as a house divided.
Okay. Thank you very much, David, joining us. Thank you. And you have a very good day and a good weekend. All right, that's David Seymour, ACT Party leader. They announced yesterday their attack on the cost of living in specific. Do you think that'll work? Do you think it'll have any effect? Essentially, it is an attack on tariffs. Well, there are not a lot of tariffs. $200 million is not much in the scheme of things. A suggestion that Adrian Orr and the Reserve Bank of New Zealand's got to stop printing money. Well, they probably have now, to be fair. That horse may, well, I was going to say it may well have. That horse has bolted. But also a new supermarket chain in New Zealand. But I guess the really important thing about what he was talking about now is immigration. And that really it's time to let the borders open again.